So today we are going to be cycling from Inch to Dingle. It's about 50 kilometres. We're following the Eurovelo 1 route, although I'm going to suggest a great detour you might like to take. Now you might think this is a terrible cycle if you've ever driven the road, but in fact it's not, because just as we're coming up here from the top of Inch Beach, there is a right turn that takes you up the old relief road to Annascaul, and in fact pretty much on this route you are off this very busy regional road, and then it joins the national road further down, almost the entire route. There's a very brief bit of the national road along Annascaul. So this is the relief road that's heading up, and you can look out. There's a great view from a couple of points over this, all the way back to Glen Bay where we started previously. If you remember that story of the IRA 1921 guns raid on Glen Bay train station, this is where they would have crossed from on that morning. So this route is part of the Dingle Way. The cycleway route obviously isn't the Dingle Way, but the road we're on now is on the Dingle Way, and in a while you will see me pass some walkers on that. We're heading towards Annascaul. Now Annascaul is famous for its Tom Crean, the Arctic explorer, came from there, and after he retired from exploring, after he retired he set up a pub there, and that pub is still there, sort of trading off the name. But it's also interesting because it's got a fantastic lake just outside it, which I would show you. The opening photograph was that lake. Now that's not on the route itself, but it's a short diversion. I'll talk about that in a minute. And the lake in Annascaul itself, in Irish, is Annascaul, which translates to the River of the Hero. And the interesting thing is the hero in question is Cú Chulainn. Now that's odd because Cú Chulainn is normally associated with the north and with Ulster in particular. And indeed a future cycle I intend to do is the Tain Way, or Torn Way, following Queen Maeve's raid to get the brown cow in Cooley, and Cú Chulainn was the guy fighting them. So how did Cú Chulainn end up down at Annascaul, you might ask? And that is not terribly clear, but I will fill in the details once we get to the lake itself. It's a bit of a tale. I'm not sure I'm 100% convinced that it's probably true. Now, as you can see, the ascent here is pretty steep. I have previously cycled this route, most of this route the other way, and I was towards the end of the trip, I was heading up, and I thought I might pop down to Inch Beach, and I looked at the contours on a map, and I went, oh no, I don't want to cycle down there and then have to cycle back up again. On that occasion, I was following the main road, which goes from Annascaul to Camp. It's got a cycleway along part of it, I think from memory up to pretty much the crest, but then there's nothing. There are a couple of side roads you can take to divert off it, but the main road is not, as you might imagine, pleasant cycling, particularly if you're going to be doing that in July and August. I think this route is better, as you'll see in the video that's going to be tomorrow, where we're coming back up from Dingle towards Tralee. There is a terrible section of that national road, I think about a 10 kilometre section, which is very fast moving but also very narrow. But this route that we're following today, as I said, this is all pretty pleasant, and particularly this section here, as we're coming up on that relief road, and now we're going to come around the corner and get this great view over to the mountains on the right hand side. On your left. Sorry. No problem.
Well, we just listened. Yeah. That was a great story, I tell you.
You can hear me ringing the bell on that, but as I often find, if people are walking in groups, they don't notice the bell, although they're hearing it somewhere, because often once you then speak, they're like, oh, okay, I knew there was somebody back there, but I didn't know what the actual noise was. I guess people also don't hear bicycle bells that much. My attitude to walkers in general is that they're the more vulnerable road users, so the same way we would like car drivers to be nice and polite to us, that's the way we should treat the walkers. So this is the sweep down to Annascaul itself, very impressively steep hill. Dingle is basically straight ahead, and as you look down this road, The EV1 doesn't go down the hill and back up the other side once it gets down to the village itself, which is, as usual, villages is at a crossing point of the river. It follows the main road to the left. However, as I'll show you in a minute, you could actually just go straight down and then straight back up the other side. And there is a bit of an argument for it, in particular if you intend to do the lake diversion, because the turnoff for the lake, at least the closest turnoff, is just on the other side of the village. So this is us coming through the small village itself, coming down to the bridge over the river, River of the Hero, as we saw, and then there is a section of cycle path which confusingly is on the wrong side of the road, and it's kind of only really, it's not really a two-way cycle path, one of those ones you're not sure what you're meant to do. And then EV1 turns off it at some point. Now the reason I'm saying at some point is as we're coming up here, I'm actually making an error. The cycle path runs out and there's a turn at the same time it runs out. Here we go. So naturally enough, I assume that must be the turn off, and I came up what is a very, very, very steep hill indeed, and I'll just let you hear what I sounded like when I got to the top of the hill. Now the proper route continues along the side of the National Road. The National Road is quite busy at that stage, and there isn't actually a cycle path, I think, from that section until after we rejoin it in a couple of minutes. So you might want to consider whether, in fact, I accidentally made the better of the two decisions in deciding to come up here. But as I said, the other reason to take this higher road, as you can see, it's much, much quieter. There's some farm traffic on it, not a lot else. It's got a fantastic view over to the left, back out down towards the bay. But the other reason to take this is that there is a turn off for Annascaul Lake. I have passed it at the point we turn onto it. I've already passed it, and then it comes back on again a little bit further down here. So in other words, you can do this little triangle diversion. I think it's probably a total diversion of about 4 kilometers or so, and so get to the lake that way. But here's a bit more. So, made a navigation error there. I went up a very steep hill, realised I was on the wrong road, looked at the map ahead, and I could see it was going to rejoin the right route a bit further down. Now that section, but there were 2 big hills, so I decided to keep going, hit 2 more big hills. So where I'm actually meant to be is down there at the bottom of the valley. That's where the National Road is. That's the proper EV1 route. The road I'm on is going to swing down and rejoin that in a moment, so there'll be a nice hill going down. If you want to have a harder time with some extra hills, by all means come up and take the route I've done, otherwise I would stay down there. So looking at the map, the red line here is the route I took, with that little blue stroke being where I turned off, but you could actually just follow it on and join further, and this is the lake diversion route, as you can see. Now, so this is Annascaul Lake. So a little bit about it. It's named after a woman called Scaul. So we start with Cú Chulainn's house, which is this cairn that's sitting on top. You can see it on Google Satellite View if you have a look. Looks quite hard to get to. And the basic story is that Cú Chulainn, who is a giant in this story, he's not normally presented as a giant, is Scaul is his lover, and another giant she bathes every day in the lake, and another giant is assaulting her, and he comes to the rescue, and the 2 giants are standing on either side of the mountains throwing absolutely huge rocks at each other. Now at a certain point, Cú Chulainn gets whacked with one of the big rocks and collapses, and Scaul thinks he has died, and so she drowns herself in the lake. And then Cú Chulainn comes back alive, sees Scaul floating face down, is really enraged with the other giant, throws another huge rock at him, and then kills the other giant. Now, in other versions of the story, that other giant is a relation or a friend of Cú Chulainn, and the whole thing is a bit much less tense. But it's basically, the idea is the lake itself is formed from this battle between 2 giants standing on the mountains and fighting over Scaul. This is the section of cycleway that you rejoin as you come back down on the National Road. As you saw it, as you will have seen, it starts after I had rejoined it. I think the section between where I left in the wrong place and that section actually doesn't have one. When I looked at my cycle route map, I used cycle.travel, it's not actually marked on that. But anyway, the cycleway takes us up towards the ridge line here, and it's at that point that we're going to turn off onto local roads. So this bit, I don't like cycleways on national roads anyway. I mean, they're better than cycling on the national road, but they're never very pretty, and this turns into a footpath for a section here. That's the view back down the hill behind me, but you come off here on the right and off we go. And so now we're heading on this quiet back road, or it's a network of back roads, and this is going to run all the way to Dingle. So that's the only bit of busy main road. It was that very short section at Inch Beach, and that relatively short section coming out of Annascaul, which you can mostly skip, as I said. This road is also part of the Dingleway in section, so again you will be coming across walkers, but as you can see from the grass down the middle, it certainly doesn't get very much in the way of traffic. So we're now approaching a very tight bend, steep downhill section that crosses the Owenalondrig River. There it is there. Just across the other side of the road, that's on the left-hand side of the road, and just above the national road is an old railway line viaduct. So there's a railway line running down to Dingle from Tralee until 1953. At peak, there were 2 passenger services a day and a third on market days. But it was one of those lines that probably never really made that much sense. It never turned a profit. And once they'd improved the roads, the bus from Tralee to Dingle was about 50% faster than the rail line. So it didn't really last. It was sustained for a while by cattle transport and sheep transport and that sort of thing. But as it was one of those regional railway lines in Ireland, that was probably not a great idea in the first place, and that also was apparently relatively poorly executed, which is why it was so slow, because there were some sections on which they had to go very slow indeed. So as we're coming through here, we're going to come up to a factory type building, or a very large farm building, and that is the Kerry Sheep and Wool Co-op. So that's a co-op that was set up in 1974 and basically was to help all the sheep farmers on the mountains to the north in particular. The mountains to the north of this section are in fact the approaches to the Connor Pass as you're coming from Dingle. You'll see that tomorrow when I cycle up to the Connor Pass. That's on the next video. And these have, I mean, sheep farming in Ireland is not particularly economical. It's quite environmentally destructive as well. Like, those mountains should not really be bare like they are. They should have woodland on them, at the very least hazel scrub. And in fact, in recent years, about 6,000 sheep have come off those mountains because it's not very practical. And it's also quite hard work, particularly lambing season in February when the weather's fairly miserable. A lot of people basically don't want to inherit it, and so the number of farmers has dropped drastically, and EU stocking laws have also changed, so they're trying to destock the mountains, and that is happening to a large extent. It's down about 6,000. A lot of that Connor Pass land has been bought. Here it is now. The Kerry Land Co-op has been bought as a national park in the recent past, and they're going to allow grazing on that, but it would be good to actually see that phased out and instead see the people working the land for at the moment, sheep farmers, instead being employed to help it bring it back to a more natural state. That is going to actually need work, because one of the problems with overgrazing is that when you stop the overgrazing, it's not necessarily woodland that comes back. Very often what comes back instead is bracken, and unless you have a program that clears the bracken until you start to get trees established, then they won't grow. Or the other thing that happens is that deer simply replace the sheep, and there's already massively huge amounts of deer in Ireland, so any real process would probably involve having to drastically reduce deer numbers in the mountains, and also of course in Kerry wild goat numbers. That's what the whole Clogan thing is about, so that would be another issue. So just here on the left we're passing Garfinny Bridge. That's famous. It's medieval, and it's mortarless, but it's famous because of a massacre that happened in 1580, and the English forces on the way to that massacre at Smerick marched across that bridge, according to local stories, and that's basically during the Desmond Rebellion, when a Spanish Italian force of about 600 landed at Smerick, were besieged by an English force that put them under artillery fire, so they surrendered, and despite believing that they had negotiated terms of surrender, the English executed everybody of the rank of captain and below from that army. So particularly infamous, and Sir Walter Raleigh was involved, who was a bit of a butcher altogether in Ireland. So we have now arrived in Dingle. Historically, this is links to Spain going way back. There was a Treaty of Dingle with the Spanish, I think, in about 1580, so that's probably partially why that force attempted to land here. They did spend the first 3 days in Dingle Bay. Now it's a very, very famous tourist town. I stayed in the Rainbow Hostel on the edge of the town, which has got camping out the back. If I remember correctly, it was €18 a night, which is a very good deal for Dingle because, as I was saying on yesterday's video, accommodation is not only very expensive, but also because of its popularity with American tourists is also very hard to come by in the summer. Now, my next video is now going to be taking out around Sleigh Head cycle. Sleigh Head is a very famous drive, so I'm going to show you what it's like to actually cycle. I have now cycled it a couple of times. I'll show you the long and the short way around it. And here is the Rainbow Hostel. A tip for this, if you are camping there, is that they lock the hostel overnight and it doesn't open in the morning until the first person gets up. So if, like me, you were planning an early start on the Connor Pass, that can be a little awkward. I was delayed about 20 minutes more, but it's good enough for camping all the same. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Give me a follow on Instagram or TikTok as E-Bike Touring Life. I post content as I'm making it, as I'm cycling over there. The YouTubes take time to edit, and so these always appear quite a little bit afterwards. If you've cycled this route yourself or you've any questions or opinions on it, please do post a comment. I do read them all. Often other people reply as well, and a lot of my videos, they're quite a repository of information. Hope all this inspires you to take a look at cycle touring and e-bike touring in particular, and if you do, perhaps one day I will see you on the road.